say to yourself, I'm not sure it's such a good idea in this space, folks, given the amount of things AI can do. And, we've seen the likes of generative AI, how prone it can be to make mistakes. And we've seen lots of AIs in the past.
On a sidebar, I'm an electrical engineer.
Okay.
And one of the
You know a lot more about
problems,
this than I do, so.
no, my specialty is medical electronics, but this is for another podcast.
Okay.
The point I wanted to make, however, is that when you see you have a last mile problem with the distribution of the grid, because imagine a high rise where you plug in, half of them are Teslas. And you have a problem of the last mile because as the distribution goes down, the cables are thinner and the voltage is lower, right? 110 to 20 in most Europe. So you have a problem. You have to recable these buildings if you want to plug in so many electric vehicles, for instance, which are high demand of current. But
Sure.
that's for another podcast. Maybe I'll come in your podcast and explain this. But there are a lot of ethical problems. There are a lot of problems we didn't discuss yet. So I think we have some areas there, and I know Isabella is passionate about this. So maybe Isabella.
Yes, Tom, we talk a lot about AI, and if you remember back then for my book on archive, I'm sure it's a long time ago, but basically a lot of the focus is how AI is impacting the society besides, just advance the business development and in the technical perspective. What's your experience like based on what you see the company you work with in terms of developing, ensuring ethical and responsible use of AI. What's your take on this part?
I think you are on mute, Tom.
I think he's not. Tom, can you hear us?
Tom?
Are we disconnected or something?
No, because we have video. I'm not very sure what's going on. Tom?
We couldn't hear you all of a sudden. It's like,
We don't hear you.
Oh, you're not hearing me.
oh, now there you
No.
go.
I can't hear you, Manuel, either.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Oops,
And
sorry.
Isabella? Okay.
Yeah,
So
good.
we'll cut maybe this section, but maybe
Sorry.
Isabella,
Can
you want to start again with your question? So we'll.
Uh, yes, I was asking, we talk a lot about how AI has been advanced in the business and technical front, and based on what you see in your work and other company, how do you see the development of the ethical AI and responsible use of technology in the industry today? And what's your take on this?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's an interesting and important question. I think what we're seeing is that a lot of the AI development that's happening is happening with West Coast US companies whose mantra is often, move fast and break things, which is, in some cases can be good, but when it comes to AI, you kind of got to say to yourself, I'm not sure it's such a good idea in this space, folks, given the amount of things AI can do. And, we've seen the likes of generative AI, how prone it can be to make mistakes. And we've seen lots of AIs in the past, famous example of Microsoft Tay, for example, which was trivial, but still it showed very much the dangers. And similarly, was it the Amazon HR program, which used AI for recruitment, and it turned out that it was recommending hires of white males because it was based on the hiring data of the previous, don't know, 10 years, we'll say, where a lot of white males had been recruited, and so it thought this was the ideal candidate, and rather than looking down through the CV proper, the resume proper, it was just optimizing for the people that they had previously, hired. So a lot of it is around making sure, and I'm not sure that it is happening yet properly, but making sure that the training data that's used in these AIs is as diverse and inclusive as possible. And then also having proper ethics boards in these organizations. And one of the worrying things you're seeing is that a lot of the people on these kind of boards in OpenAI were let go recently. So it's a tough one. I mean, what these AIs can do is incredibly powerful, and so you really, really, really want to make sure that they're doing the right things. It is a big concern.
Thank you. I can see you
In the
see.
ethics in that data, right? So data has to be ethical in order for AI to be ethical, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. So I can see you are talking from a very, very fundamental perspective, like how the creators are, their goals is different than what we're concerned about. It's more focused on the profits and everything else. It's secondary, and
Yeah.
also letting go of the ethical board, and it seems they don't want to compromise, at least yet. I do you see any pressure over there where you are in terms of reinforce the ethical practice from the policy perspective, or it's still not such a mainstream kind of topic yet in your particular network?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing, I'm based in Europe, and in Europe we're starting to see there are concerns at a legislative level, and that's important. And I think we need to pass some, and I know there's been talk of legislation in California as well, though I don't think it has been signed yet. But I think as soon as we start to get some good legislation in place around putting guide rails around AI, then we'll start to see better practices happening. Because we saw with the likes of GDPR, as I mentioned earlier, we saw the impact that had globally. Even though it was only based out of Europe, it had a global impact. We'll see similar with the EUDR legislation. We've seen similar with legislation around vehicle emissions. These have ripple-on effects to other markets as well. Europe is a big market, and so when you're manufacturing devices for Europe and you have to take their emissions into account, then it makes sense to do the same for other locales as well. And I think the same will happen with AI. We are seeing at the moment a bit of a fracturing, as in one example of that is iOS 18, which launched with AI built into it, except not in Europe. Because when they launched iOS 18 in Europe, they stripped out the intelligence part, the AI part, because they weren't able to show that it was compliant with European legislation. And so whether they're using that to kind of put pressure on Europe to relax their legislation around it, or whether they're just being conservative and saying, yeah, well, we'll take our time to make sure we're compliant with everything and then we'll launch, or maybe a bit of both, I don't know. But the point is, we are starting to see a fracturing there. And I think what will happen is, as other regions, as other geos start to roll out legislation as well around AI, things will start to improve. We're at very early days of this kind of stuff right now. It's an immature space. It absolutely urgently needs proper regulations to be rolled out to guide these companies who, as I say, have a tendency to move fast and break things.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really timely and insightful feedback from the Europe front, and I can't agree anymore. It's a very urgent topic than ever before things going out of control. And we talk a lot about how AI can help advancing, addressing the challenges with the data overflowed kind of dynamic. What could be the downsides or the potential risk? Now we're back to a more concrete example perspective about the AI threats. When we integrating AI heavily into our daily operations for sustainability and supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest risk is obviously going to be uh, what happens with the data. You know, who's holding the data and what's happening to it. The cybersecurity is another big risk as well, of course. Now that I think about it for a second, because obviously, if you have all this data in one place, it becomes a giant target. We're starting to see a huge increase in the number of attacks that are happening, the number of hacks that are happening. We are, you see it in every Gartner deck. The amount of zettabytes of information that we've created in the last X months is more that was created, that is more than was ever created before in the history of man. We've all seen these kind of slides, and of course, as that increasing amount of data is generated and collected and stored and used to train AIs, it also becomes, as I said, a giant target for hackers. And I don't know how many times just in the last few months I've seen headlines about the latest hack that's happened, whose credit card information has been taken, whose social security data has been taken, whose health information has been taken. And, it happens increasingly all the time. And it's a function of the fact that we are generating and storing and creating all this data. What you'd hope to see, which I haven't seen yet, but what you'd hope to see is that AI would be rolled out in some way to stop these attacks happening. I know it is used in cybersecurity as a way of trying to flag attacks before they happen or as they're happening in real time. But it hasn't rolled out at scale to the point yet where it's reducing visibly the number of attacks.
Yes, agree. Anything to add, Manuel?
Yeah, actually, you brought a very interesting point. And as you're going through that, AI is still not a perfect environment. It confabulates, they come under different names, but essentially makes things up, and as you're going through that, and in part of the risk, again, coming back that the data for sustainability has to be auditable. And if it's made up, on top of all the risks you mentioned, right, cybersecurity and so on, you have another problem with AI on that level, right?
Yeah. No, it's true. The hallucinations, as they call them, in particularly in generative AI, are a problem. It is a problem that seems to be pretty unique to generative AI. You don't find the reinforcement learnings or the machine learnings making stuff up when it doesn't know it. It's just a function of the way the generative AI works. That it doesn't want to say I don't know. So if it comes to something where it doesn't know, it makes stuff up if it doesn't know. So. And I mean, the thing to be aware of there is that it can happen, and so you need to double check always if you're using it. You don't find generative AI being used that much in the likes of reporting for the likes of sustainability reporting or things like that, precisely for that reason. It's just you can't trust it enough to use it in an environment where that information has to be verifiable and auditable.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. I think we can continue the discussion for a long, long time. So
Yeah,
maybe
thank you so much for the insights and everything. Well, as a wrap-up question, we always engaging with next generations, and I really see this world is more and more belonging to them, and their opinion and their vision of the future really shape the way that we're building things right now more than ever. What's your piece of advice for younger generations, young professionals who are seeking a career in such a industry like sustainability and AI development?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, no, the biggest challenge we have going forward is climate and fixing climate. ESG is extremely broad. It encompasses, everything in the social space, governance space, environmental space. And it's probably a horrible thing for me to say, but if we don't fix diversity and inclusion in the next 100 years in the workplace, the world will go on. But if we don't fix climate in the next 100 years, we're toast, literally. So this is the biggest challenge we have as a species. And if people are looking for a big challenge that they want to get into, something important that needs to be worked on, that's the one I'd say people need to get into, because we're looking now at a situation where we are close to 430 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. It should be around 280. And that's causing all kinds of problems. We've seen massive flooding just this weekend in Central Europe with up to 10 people they say dead now, but it's going to get even higher. We've had a typhoon in Southeast Asia. We've had, massive wildfires are happening as well. The implications of not fixing this are only going to get worse. 2024 is going to go down on record as the hottest year on record, hotter than 2023, which was the hottest year on record, which was hotter than 2022, which is the hottest. You're starting to see the trend here. We are close to the 1.5 degrees C that we said we would try and limit global warming to in 2015 in the Paris Climate Accord. We're already close to breaching that. So we really have to do everything we can to make sure that if we do breach 1.5, we don't go beyond 2, and actually we try and reverse it and get it back down again. So this is, to me, the biggest challenge that we face, and it is something that I would advise anyone and everyone who's looking for something to get into,
So more studies on climate, more students to take sustainability and climate in a I would assume multidisciplinary approach, because there are technical solutions to climate change, there are environmental solutions to climate change, there are management solutions, and legal, by the way, not to forget the
Absolutely.
profession.
There's a huge amount of climate litigation taking place at the moment. There's hundreds of cases being taken now, and that's going to be a huge area as well. So it's not just technical, as you said, that there's all kinds of ways to tackle this problem.
That reminds me about the Netherlands, I think, was the country where a group of young people sued the government about the future on climate change, right? They said that the
It's happened
government
in a
will
number of
destroy.
countries. I think the most high profile case was the elderly Swiss women who took Switzerland to the European Court of Human Rights and won their case, saying that Switzerland, the Swiss government, was in breach of their human rights by not acting enough on climate. So there's been a few cases. The Netherlands was another one. Portugal was another one. The UK, France, all these governments have been taken to court by their citizens at various times, usually for not going into enough detail on how they're going to meet their climate commitments. Is how a lot of it happens. But there's been a huge number of litigation cases taken against the fossil fuel companies as well, and that's going to increase the same way the tobacco companies were taken to court. So, there's a lot happening in that space.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom, for today, everything you shared. A lot of details and also the big picture for us to kind of see what's connecting everything together. Thank you very much for your time. And also thanks to our audience for tuning in. Make sure you join us every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talk series, where you can gain new perspective on how to mitigate risk and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation. Until next week, goodbye for now. Bye, Tom. Bye, Manuel.
Thanks, Isabella.
Bye.
Thanks, Manuel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.